listening to Resist and Restore, a podcast from the Circle of Hope Pastors where we're extending the table of our dialogue. I'm Johnny Rashid.
I'm Rachel Sensenig.
I'm Julie Hoke.
And I'm Ben White.
And I'm glad we're together. It's good to be together and to offer people hope from where we are, and I think this show is all about that. We're going to start with some dialogue about what it looks like to be a peacemaking Christian during this time. And then Rachel's going to interview one of our people about how the 12-step program relates to Jesus. And then at the end, we'll have spiritual show and tell, where we share with you what nourishes our soul. How's that sound?
Yo, this is going to be good.
That sounds good, Johnny. Thank you. Let's start with some talk back. We love when people write to us about what they're thinking and the questions they're asking and how they're working with this content that we're working with each week. And so someone wrote to us this week and they said, amidst all of the outcry against police brutality and justice for Black lives, I find myself wondering what it looks like to practice pacifism or be a pacifist right now. When I told a relative that I understand why people are looting and rioting, they were somewhat aghast and couldn't understand why I would condone violence. It got me thinking.
Condone is in quotations.
Correct. Right? Yep. This person is trying to, they're an ally. They understand the rioting and they're trying to reconcile that with their pacifist beliefs. Do you understand what they're going through here, Johnny?
Yeah, I do. I'm a pacifist. I'm a peacemaker. One of the reasons I'm so incensed about the police violence is because of my commitment to peace. But then when you see these responses that appear violent, it's confusing. And rather than morally evaluating it, and that's a temptation to do, it is easier to morally evaluate things than it is to feel them. I'm moved to feel, because what I see in the streets is pain, it's anger, it's hurt. It's the response to generations of racist oppression in the United States. And though, yes, I wish no property were destroyed. I mean, I don't mind the Confederate statues fall, but I wish that this didn't happen. I'm moved to feel and to understand. And I think that's what Jesus moved me to do as well. You know, even on the cross, Jesus says, forgive them, Father, they don't know what they're doing. The man is so empathetic, and I think that that's the same sort of response Christians need to have.
So you think that Jesus on the cross, he's kind of giving empathetic witness to a riot?
Yeah, I mean, what happened to Jesus? You had oppressed people, the Jewish people, that said crucify him.
Yeah, I had never thought about it that way, but a riot killed Jesus. A riot resulted in Jesus' death. What about that? I never thought about that.
And yet Jesus is empathetic, and yet Jesus rises again.
Yeah, and Jesus, he never assumes the position of moral guardian over any individual or even the culture at large. I think when Christians assume that our purpose or our mission is to be moral guardians of one another, we are completely missing our purpose.
Say more about what you mean by moral guardian. I think I'm picking up what you're putting down, but maybe not everyone is there yet. What do you mean? Say more, Julie.
Well, we are called to be followers of Christ and to live into the kingdom of God here on earth, to make the kingdom of God evident in the way that we live and love. And that kingdom was not established by moral policing of people. It was established through the self-sacrificial love of Christ and this complete upending of the powers of the world. And Jesus set this example of righteousness and even called people into righteousness to a higher degree than even the religious rulers of the time, but not by setting rigid rules and condemning people when they didn't meet them. It was an invitation to live into the character of God.
Well, and so the invitation of living in the Philadelphia region when a couple weeks ago, buildings were on fire. The invitation there is, well, I guess there's kind of two ways we could do it. We could say, that's wrong, and make sure that everyone knows our moral position, and I guess because we feel like Rachel, you were saying that the person who wrote this is an ally, as in they feel allied with the Black Lives Matter movement because they want the systemic oppression of Black people to stop in the United States. Then that's a big dream, and they want to do the work to be a part of that. And so when you feel allied with the movement, you're put in this position where now I have to defend everything they do. And so we were kind of painted into a corner and say, well, there are people that have signs that say Black Lives Matter, and they're burning a Starbucks. What do I do? And I think Jesus would probably kneel down and draw in the dirt and wait to see what's going to happen and who's going to drop their stones. I'm referencing John 8. He's going to wait and see. He's going to be in the pain. He's going to be next to it. And isn't that how we experience God in our lives? Like, the presence of Jesus, isn't that the transformative thing? He's going to be next to us. And so it's not so cerebral as like, is this right or wrong? And should we legislate this? Or should we send the people that we pay to kill people in to kill these people?
Right. Yeah, Ben, I'm feeling what you're putting down. The character of God is understanding. It's God's kindness that leads us to repentance. And so, it really, if we're going to do a comparison of like the chaos of the riots versus 400 years of the dehumanization of an entire group of people, there's no comparison here. I mean, this thing has been so contained compared to the level of grief and lament and outrage that we probably should be having about the dehumanization that Black people have endured in this country.
If we were going to be the moral police, the case is closed. Right. And God understands that. And so I just agree with all of you that the position of a Jesus follower, I hope, would be understanding and a desire to understand more what we don't understand yet. Yeah, especially for white people. Mm-hmm. You don't understand. I don't understand this. And so the term ally, I think, is really helpful because it's a label that I can try to live into. Another good label is I'm going to be anti-racist. If you're not anti-racist, you're racist. And that's just descriptive. I want to take the epithet out of it. I want to take the insult out of it. Yeah, if you're not actively working against racism, you are subject to racism. And you are bending your knee to Caesar and to Baal and to every biblical idol that you can think of. Because you're not having Jesus as Lord, you're having whiteness as your Lord.
I think that the insistence on morally evaluating everything leads us to this problem. It's very hard to acknowledge the implicit bias that you inherited as a person in the United States. That's what we're talking about. And the reason you can't say you're racist is because you would feel so condemned after acknowledging that. And so can we get out of the condemnation game, both for the people that are rioting, but also for the people that are complicit in racism? Can we move towards a healing and forgiveness? This is the mode of the gospel. This is what Jesus is talking about. Sins are no longer held against you. There's no condemnation in Jesus. And that's an invitation to become a new person, and people are responding in different ways to that. But I think that the new nonviolent way involves not violently judging people. Moral condemnation is a different kind of violence. And for people that have been oppressed, responding this way, I actually think it's in some ways mild-mannered, considering the atrocities committed against them. I think in general, the Black response to white oppression has been a loving response and a response for a new world and not a race war, despite being baited into one at times.
Yep, it's been incredibly gracious. And so I think the call of the body of Christ now is to pay attention to the wound, to tend to the wound, to see the disease, and turn to the healer, like you're saying, Johnny, who is present.
I'm so glad that you're listening to us and talking back to us. And if you want to talk back more, email us at resistandrestorepodcast@circleofhope.net. We want more people to connect with us and listen to the show. And so if you want to help us, go to circleofhope.net/sharing, and you can share money with us, and that'll help pay our communications manager who helps make this show happen, as well as the pastors. Additionally, if you can't afford anything, that's okay. If you would just give us a 5-star review wherever you listen to this podcast, that will help more people hear us. And of course, we want you to connect with our community in the different ways that are available to you. The Sunday meetings still happen online during the pandemic, and they're a chance to relate to one another in a real-time, organic, homemade meeting where people are authentically expressing their faith and worshiping together and trying to see God in a new way, trying to experience God in a difficult time to do that. The more people that we have there, the better the meeting is because there's a live chat and there's engagement that happens that way. We have cells that meet throughout the week. They are also online during this time. And we're thinking about what it looks like to open some up, but right now they're online. Go to circleofhope.net/cells to join one of these intimate groups where people are getting to know God by getting to know one another. And also on Monday the 22nd, we want to do some theology together. And me and Rod, one of our pastors, will lead us in a time about wondering whether we have a definitive teaching about the election. And in this case, we're talking about the presidential election, political elections. How does it work? What's our definitive teaching on it? So this will be a time for that kind of engagement. Once again, if you want to connect with us, write us at Resist and Restore Podcast at circleofhope.net.
Rachel, and I'm here with Jimmy Weitzel. He's one of the leaders in our church, born and raised in Philly, and sober almost 7 years, right, Jimmy?
Yep, that's right.
So tell us a little bit about your story, Jimmy, as we get started, like growing up in Philly, getting into recovery, and getting connected to the church.
I come from a Philadelphia family. Everyone is from here. We haven't left. I got 2 older sisters. We were born in Juniata Park. We lived there for a couple years, Frankfurt, and then we just moved all around. By the time I was in 5th grade, my parents divorced. For me, it was a hard time. My parents fought a lot. And even though I thought I was opened about my feelings and emotions and stuff, but I really kept things inside. I didn't like telling people how I really felt or what was really going on inside my head. My parents divorced. I went to another new school. I've been to a couple different schools. And then probably by the time I was in high school was when I was finally settled with myself, feeling comfortable. I made friends. Where I come from, you start drinking. You start drinking in high school. And my mom was sober at the time. I remember I would go to some parties and I wouldn't drink, you know what I mean? Because I was like, my mom's sober, I guess. I wouldn't even say it was peer pressure or anything. I just was like, you know what, everyone else is doing it. Why not just try it? And I tried it and it was
the best thing ever?
100%. It was the greatest thing I experienced, you know what I mean? Which is funny, but it really was. I didn't really know what feeling good felt like, and that kind of comforted me in that sense. So as time goes on, I become friends with older kids, I'm a neighborhood dude, and I start dabbling in pills, and I remember it got crazy by my senior year of high school. By the time I was a senior, I was addicted to Percocet. I was cutting classes. I was getting high before school, in school. I remember I played sports. I played football, and I really didn't care about it. I was just just something to do. And I remember colleges coming and asking me if I wanted to play at their college, and I was just like, nah. I wanted to stay in the neighborhood because that's all I knew, and that's all I really wanted to know.
It sounds like the feeling that the drug was giving you kind of became priority.
Oh, totally. I think at that point in my life, I just accepted this is who I was. Fear ran my life. So I could not even admit that, right? I had a fear of admitting things at an early age. Even when I was saying I had a fear of saying what I really thought and how I really felt. You know what I mean? That carried out for 18 years, even longer. Some couple bad times throughout those years. By the time I was 24, I was addicted to heroin. I was shooting heroin, and I don't want to go into crazy stories of what had happened. For me, it ended up, I was living in a room in Germantown, sleeping on a futon, and that's just one of them. I was a heroin addict. It was terrible.
So what was kind of the moment of change? What happened to bring you into recovery?
Well, I was in and out of rehabs. I knew what AA, NA, was all about. Really, it was the last day of me actively using. I was living in North Philly at the time. I was living around 35th and Allegheny. And I remember I was going to get lunch for my mom and my nephew. And she gave me $20. And I just went and I copped, got what I needed to get. I was at a hunting park in Fox Street, I think, at the time. I was crying, bawling my eyes out. And I just couldn't. I was like, I can't do this no more. I could either stay straight and walk down the way to Kensington, or I could go home and ask for help. I think this is I heard a voice. I don't know if it was my voice or my subconscious, or I don't really know. I just heard something and it was that's insane. I was like, yeah, that is insane.
Well, that voice you heard telling you that it was insane to kind of throw your life away and go down into Kensington in that moment instead of going home, weren't you going to throw your phone into the gutter and just really give yourself over to it?
Yeah. Yeah, I had a little flip phone at the time and I had needles on me and stuff. I threw them down the sewer and I was going to just throw the phone down, but because I had that moment, I was just I'll keep it, Yeah. So I went home, but still believing the lie, because I didn't want to go to rehab. I wanted to do it my own way. I had Suboxone at the crib. I could do it myself. But luckily my mom was no, you gotta go away or you're out of this house. And this is after my pops kicked me out, my sisters kicked me out. This was last straw. So when I was in the rehab, I prayed. It was the first time I ever prayed and I had no idea what I was doing. I just remember feeling I don't want to be here again. I never want to feel this way again. I got on my knees and I was praying and I was in rehab. So 4 other dudes were in the room with me. And I remember a dude came in and I didn't get up. Usually I would because I'd be oh, I don't want them to think I'm a weirdo. I'm praying. I really I didn't care what they thought because I was in so much pain that I needed something.
Fast forward to meeting Nick, your sponsor, and getting connected to Jesus in the 12 steps.
I went to a recovery house. So I went to this detox for 5 days, went to a recovery house. I never did that before. And everything I had on wasn't mine. I had a size 13 pair of Jordans on my feet. I'm size 10 and a half, 11, So I was out there, I shot out. I got to the recovery house, met my housemate, and he was you need to get to a meeting right away. And at this point I was I'll do whatever. And Nick came and picked me up. Never met him a day in my life. It was Nick and my buddy Steve, who plays a huge role in my life. But we went to a meeting and I just remember they were just happy. They just had joy. And that's something that I was longing for so long. They were just joyful. I remember sitting in the back of the meeting and Nick looked over at me and he gave me a little head nod to get my hand up. I think the first time ever me admitting that I was an alcoholic and an addict was then. Like I said, my name's Jimmy, I'm an alcoholic, and I have no idea what I'm doing, and I just need help. I think admitting all that stuff for me was huge. I think the steps were already in the process, living these steps before I even really actually knew, But when I was going through the steps, we would meet all the time, me and Nick. We would read a chapter of Alcoholics Anonymous, the book, and he would break it down to me. We would meet in the basement at the recovery house, real dirty, dingy basement, people walking in and out doing their laundry. I think he really beat into my head the first step about talking about how I need to surrender to the fact that I'm an alcoholic, that something happens to me when I put a drink or a drug in my body. The little word or good word that he gave me was if you're allergic to strawberries, you don't eat strawberries. You know what I mean? So, it's I'm allergic to alcohol. Something happens to me. I have an allergic reaction. I can't do it. You know what I mean? I get in trouble. That's what happens. I think the first two big things was surrendering and accepting to the fact of what alcohol did to me and what becomes of it. So 2 and 3 are being restored to sanity is step 2, and step 3 is turning myself over to the care of God and God's will. And I think that's takes practice to discern that, God, the whole God's will. I think people get jammed up about that.
Wait, can we pause right there? Because
Yeah.
I think you had a really significant experience also with Nick before you came into the church, like formally in this process of surrendering your will over to God, right? How'd you do that?
We met at a church, right? And for step 3, Nick asked me, he's like, are you ready to do this? This was like beyond just putting down a drink or a drug. He's like, you can stay sober. You can do that. That's fine. But like, if you really want to receive the gifts of sobriety, he's like, you need to turn your life over to God. You know what I mean? Like, if
Wow.
you really want that. I remember I was like, I could just stay sober and go about life, maybe having the experience later. I don't know. It was just God's plan, and I trust that in that moment is when I would turn my life over to God. You know what I mean? I feel like I'm grateful for that. Now as I see it later, I'm like, Jesus saved me. But at that time, I had no idea what any of that meant.
Well, how did you do it? Like, what did you feel or think in that church in that moment?
We prayed. We said this 3rd step prayer, and I just felt comforted. Like, I didn't get struck down with a lightning bolt. I actually felt comforted for the first time in my life by something. And at that time, I didn't know what. People in AA just kept telling me to make a meeting and pray. Just pray. For me, it was the first time I felt I had a purpose, that I was cared for. I relied on God so much. Was putting down a drink and a drug and then trusting people. And I got to this step where it was like, you're going to give me all of you? You know what I mean? That's like kind of like what God is saying. I'm giving you all of me. Are you going to give me all of you? That's kind of how I view it.
Wow. There it is. God asking that question. Are you going to give me all of you? As I understand the 12 steps, then, as you keep going, you learn how to give your whole self over, right? By like writing out
your resentments and
and making amends to people. And what was that like?
The first name I wrote was my mom. And I remember writing why I was angry with her, and I started bawling and crying. How can I be mad at my mom? All that was going through my head. I just remember people saying, like, if you don't do this thorough and honest, then you might drink again. And that's like the last thing I want. So with that, I never want to drink or do drugs again. It's just pointless for me. I remember erasing it. I erased their name. I erased the resentment. I was like, I'm good. I can't do this shit. I remember I was like, I'm defeating the purpose of why I'm doing this. Because in step 5, you share it with someone else, with God. You're releasing it. You're letting it go.
Wow.
And that's all, still to this day, is to let go of things. The more I'm emptied, the more I'm able to get filled up. I need to let go and empty it out, It's just like taking your trash out. You fill the trash can. My trash night's Tuesday night into Wednesday, and you put it out. You know what I mean? You let it go. That's how I look at it.
A true Philly metaphor.
Yeah, true.
Wow. I think that whole process is just so connected to what Jesus calls all of us to do in repentance and asking for forgiveness and reconciling with others. It's Matthew 18, and we talk about it all the time in the church. What are some other connections that you see with Jesus and the 12 steps?
Well, there's a ton. We could talk about this. At least I could talk about this like for days. I love these kinds of conversations. I think the sponsorship is like discipling. I met this guy. He walked me through this process. And then my job as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous is to help the next guy, or woman, to go through this process. So I think it's a great discipleship tool,
That's so much like apprenticeship in the church, like we do in ourselves.
Totally, yeah. Having that tool has helped me become a better leader. Like, it set me up for this. And I had no idea. Like, I didn't get sober to become a church leader. I literally got sober to just stop shooting heroin. None of this is my plan. And I'm grateful to be a part of it and in it. But, I never ever thought a day in my life that I would be saying that I'm a church leader,
Well, how did that happen, Jimmy? How did you get connected to the church?
You asked me, and I don't know why. No, I'm kidding. Well, I got invited to a cell, so I was really like searching for a community outside of AA, and I have a friend, Bobby DeBrush. He really turned me on to Jesus. Like, he would always talk about Jesus, and it would just be so interesting. But my friend Duffy, he invited me to a cell, and that's how I got introduced. I just came into the cell and just found it really amazing that I can relate to others that aren't alcoholics, that aren't suffering from addiction. I thought that I was so unique. I was the only one that had fear, and I'm a mess. I literally thought Christians had it all together.
Wow.
Yeah. And now here, I'm leading the church. It's pretty wild.
Well, that was such an important insight you got in that first cell meeting, that you could relate to everybody, because we say in Circle of Hope that we're all recovering from the sin addiction. So it's true. We are all in the same boat. We are all beginners in this process of being called to give ourselves to God.
Yeah. I remember, that was another thing I learned, is that, I have to remain teachable. I have to remember that I'm just a beginner. I'm always learning new things. Whenever I feel like I know it all or whatever, I don't. And I think that's what jams me up. It gets in my way. To constantly remind myself that, I'm constantly messing up, and that's okay. But what the 12 steps have taught me, and what people in the church, and what Jesus teaches me is that, it's okay. You're forgiven. You work out your conflicts, and you change. You let God change it,
Yeah. Well, you have allowed that so much in your life, Jimmy, that people call you. I've heard your buddies joke around and call you Jesus Jim, other Jesus-y nicknames, because a lot of people say that you literally remind them of Jesus. And of course, I think that's a big compliment. What's so special about Jesus? What are the connections you see between the two of you? What do you like about him?
I like the human showing of Jesus a lot. I like, I was saying earlier, I like being a neighborhood guy. I grew up being a neighborhood dude, and Jesus just reminds me of the best neighborhood dude,
That's literally what Son of Man means, everybody's guy.
Yeah. I think that's what really got me there. I think of a lot of the things, like when he was praying before his death, and, he was crying and not wanting to do it. He got angry, flipped tables. There was a lot of things that I could relate to with that. Just the way he loved people. It just sounds cool. You know what I mean? He's got a cool story.
A pretty miraculous story.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, that's right. He does have a miraculous story. It's moments like these where I'm so grateful, and I love Jesus because he just literally restores me just by talking about him. Step 2 talks about bringing you back to sanity. Jesus brings me back all the time. So Jesus is just amazing, and I know how much people long to know him.
Wow, I agree. So he brings you back.
Yeah.
In that acceptance of our humanity, in his willingness to suffer, and in this movement from death to life. And from your story, Jimmy, you really did move from death to life. So thanks for being here and sharing your journey with us and leading us to Jesus through you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, let's end our time with spiritual show and tell. We want to share the things that are nourishing us because this takes investment, right? We have to keep working with all of this stuff. And certainly we in Circle of Hope, us pastors are constantly developing, but also just trying to pay attention. And if you have stuff that you think could nourish us, you could send it to us and we'll probably listen to you and read it or watch it or listen to it. Let's hear what's nourishing your soul this week, pastors.
In the quarantine, we've been doing a lot more housework for the theoretical possibility that someone will eventually visit us. I always think, for what company am I doing this work? But one of the things I recently did, and I was telling you all about this earlier this week, is I was figuring out how to install a new piece of technology. It's a doorbell with a camera on it, so I can see all who is detonating fireworks in my front street there. By the way, North Philly is full of fireworks right now. It's kind of amazing. So I was putting on this new piece of technology, and I had to figure out how it fit into this old 100-year-old house. And I had the eureka moment when I used the fishing wire. That's the tool used to move electrical wire around your home without making new holes and destroying it. And I was able to fish the doorbell wire through the basement and learn a little bit more about how a house worked. The reason that nourished my soul isn't because I felt that my amateur electrician skills were affirmed. It was more that I've been doing the same kind of internal work in this old structure, my body, figuring out what makes me work and how to put in new ideas and new things into me to make me my fullest self. And taking advantage of the time alone, the time isolated, in order to do internal reflection has been really helpful for me. And I'm getting the help that I need from people around me to do that. And so that's how my soul has been nourished.
Yeah, and that kind of physical work where you're just working on a problem is it's a great place for your mental cobwebs to get cleared out, or at least noticed. It's a meditative thing to figure something out and just work on it, right, Johnny?
Yeah.
It's the internal work, but it's also electric fishing wire.
Yeah, man, it's a good thing to do. Poke around, put wires in different places of your house that you never knew before, and then you might feel better.
No, that would not be a good idea for me to do.
What's nourishing your soul?
Well, we broke the seal last night and did have somebody at our dinner table for the first time in 3 months. We are here in the yellow zone in Philly, so still being very careful about very small groups. But my son Zach is assigned to make dinner once a week in our household. And he and his friend Marco were out skateboarding and shopping. And he asked if Marco could come and make dinner with him. And so we said yes. And that's the first thing that nourished my soul. It was just so good to have company again. And secondly, Zach and Marco were upset about the rally in South Philly around the Columbus statue, and they were just incensed about...
What was the rally about, Rachel?
You know, I can't speak authoritatively on it because I had other meetings last night, and I don't know, but I sensed it was pro-weapon. It was pro-keeping these remnants of public racism out there and even protecting them. And Zach and Marco were just incensed about this. And I was encouraged by their outrage that, you know, even Marco, he's grown up in South Philly. I mean, it's no secret that South Philly is one of the most kind of explicitly racist sections of the city, Deep South. And Marco's grown up here, and yet he is disrupting the cycle of racism in his life, and he and Zach are trying to do it together with their friends, and I was encouraged by that.
How about you, Julie?
In my cell, we were talking about, last night, we were talking about how Jesus, when he healed someone or fed the crowds or did a miracle, he wasn't doing that act in isolation because he came bringing the kingdom of God in himself. And so folks are talking about how when we act as followers of Jesus, when we act in compassion and with Jesus, we are not acting in isolation either. That we are actually pushing back on the powers of darkness and the kingdoms of this world, Jesus said. So that conversation was encouraging and nourishing my soul because people are motivated to really bring about change and to live into our hope, you know, not just eager for the world to get back to pre-pandemic life or something. I think this time of reflection that Johnny was talking about is really time that is reorienting us as the church. And I'm eager to see how we can keep living that out together.
Yeah. Well, I watched Bryan Stevenson's movie, Just Mercy. Well, I mean, it's also Michael B. Jordan's movie. I don't know who the producer and director is, but Jamie Foxx's movie. This is an excellent movie that's free for the rest of the month still. And after, the movie was just so... The book was amazing. I mean, it's just so beautifully written. And I read it a couple of years ago. But the movie just stirred all that up in a beautiful way. It was very emotive, very, just good cinema as well. But they didn't include this part. But after the end of the movie, I was telling Gwyneth about this part that didn't make the movie, but it was my favorite part of the book. And I just cried and cried because I was already so emotionally charged from the movie. And then I was recalling this passage. Do y'all think I could read you this passage from the book? It's like a page and a half. It might be too long. What do you think?
Yeah, give it a shot.
Okay. Bryan Stevenson is talking to a woman that he's sitting next to at the courthouse where he spends a lot of time. No, I'm not related to nobody here. Not that I know of anyway. She had a kind smile and she looked at me intensely. I just come here to help people. This is a place full of pain, so people need plenty of help around here. Well, that's really kind of you. No, it's what I'm supposed to do, so I do it. She looked away before locking eyes with me again. My 16-year-old grandson was murdered 15 years ago, she said, and I loved that boy more than my life. I wasn't expecting that response and was instantly sobered. The woman grabbed my hand. I grieved and grieved and grieved. I asked the Lord why he let someone take my child like that. He was killed by some other boys. I came to this courtroom for the first time for their trial and sat in there and cried every day for nearly 2 weeks. None of it made any sense. Those boys were found guilty for killing my grandson, and the judge sent them away to prison forever. I thought it would make me feel better, but it actually made me feel worse. She continued, I sat in the courtroom after they were sentenced and just cried and cried. A lady came over to me and gave me a hug and let me lean on her. She asked me if the boys who got sentenced were my children, and I told her no. I told her the boy they killed was my child. She hesitated. I think she sat with me for almost 2 hours. For well over an hour, we didn't neither one of us say a word. It felt good to finally have someone to lean on at the trial, and I've never forgotten that woman. I don't know who she was, but she made a difference. I'm so sorry about your grandson, I murmured. It was all I could think of to say. Well, you never fully recover, but you carry on. You carry on. I didn't know what to do with myself after those trials, so after about a year later, I started coming down here. I don't really know why. I guess I just felt maybe I could be someone, that somebody hurting could lean on. She looped her arm with mine. I smiled out at her. That's really wonderful. And I think that is just so wonderful. And I don't know a better image of God than that woman.
Thank you, Ben, for that. And thank you, team here, for a touching show. May God be with you, listeners in the audience, and may you feel the healing presence of Jesus in your life during this difficult time. Go in peace.